everybody, we're back. It's been a minute, as the kids say, but we are back with another live episode of the breakdown. We're doing our live Alberta Politics Roundup. There's really been nothing going on though, so I'm sure that this will be a short episode. Not really. It's going to be a complicated episode. We're going to talk about some of the reasons why in just a sec. But for those of you who are familiar with the live format that we like to do, we're going to go through some of the basic stories, the easy ones, the not video heavy ones at the beginning, and we're going to get into the bigger stories. Obviously, there's a lot that's happened in the last week. We're going to do our best to try to make sense of that. So, that being said, little glitch in the matrix today. We had a very special interview. I'm bearing the lead on that a little bit. We had a very special interview that we were going to present at the end of this episode. It was going to be like, hey, surprise everybody. Our patrons know what's going on. They've got the preview and everything. But we had this very special thing that we were going to do. And it turns out that the streaming platform that we use doesn't let us upload 20-minute chunks of video. So we're still putting it up tonight. But if you're paying attention, it will be a very quick pivot at the end of the show proper to the very special interview. We'll be putting it up as a separate episode on the YouTubes and on the podcasting things, because it turns out that there are limitations to tech. So there's the preamble. Let's get right into it. Getting through the big stories of the week that we got to talk about. First one we got to talk about right away, the Alberta Federation of Labor. And I'll be honest, initially I kind of bumped at, why is the Alberta Federation of Labor talking about electricity prices? But when you think about the reality that many workers, employees have to face, cost of living continues, the economy continues to be the number one subject that most people are worried about, healthcare being a second, depends on the day you ask. And it turns out we're getting screwed with our pants on. It's not good. According to a report commissioned by the Alberta Federation of Labor, since 2001, which was when Alberta's electricity grid was deregulated, except in Medicine Hat, since 2001, there's been more private ownership of electricity generation and distribution encouraged. After more than 20 years, AFL is calling it, the deregulated electricity generation is clearly a failure. And these numbers are bonkers. They're absolutely insane. They commissioned a expert in the things to take a look. And since 2001, Alberta electricity consumers, including residential, industrial, commercial, and farm electricity users, have paid about 24 billion. That's with a B. That's not small. More for electricity than if they had paid the same prices as other Canadians on average. So, like, here's the thing. Here's my immediate reaction to that when I hear something like that. I go, okay, so we're pissed about the carbon tax, but we've paid as a province 24 billion, again with a B, more than the average Canadian, not because of the Justin Trudeau Singh alliance, not because of that. Because we shot ourselves in the foot. Alberta's industrial, commercial, and farm electricity customers overpaid about 17 billion since 2001 compared to average prices paid by their peers across other provinces. Industrial users paid 13.8 billion more. Commercial and farm users paid 2.9 and 0.4 billion more. Residential, again, this number, residential customers, $7 billion more than the average Canadian in electricity prices. And that's not nothing. It's not nothing. And it's entirely our own fault because we deregulated the electricity. And again, this is another one of those areas where Alberta has this history of going, hey, what if we deregulated this thing? Wouldn't that be great? And in the immediate, there's this perception of cost savings, but in the long term, it seems like for just about everything, it ends up costing Albertans way, way more. But talking about big amounts of money, we're going to pivot to our good friends. Not really. They don't like us very much at True North, because a fascinating article, and full disclosure here, the reference and myself are the show and myself are referenced in this article from DSMOG. According to the Canadian Revenue Agency tax records reviewed by DSMOG, they reveal that the True North Centre for Public Policy, if you've been following this show for any length of time, you know how we feel about the folks, the content creators. I think that's what we're going to settle on for these pseudo. They call themselves journalists, but we're not. We call ourselves not journalists, so we're going to call them content creators. The charitable organization that is the parent group of the conservative website True North has received over $500,000, $530,000 since 2019 from the foundation of fracking pioneer Gwyn Morgan. $500,000 to True North. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, because as has been discussed in other places, True North, the media wing of True North, hides under the umbrella of the True North Center for Public Policy. That is a charity, ostensibly, because they took over an immigration charity a bunch of years ago, and they just kept their charitable status, and for reasons that defy understanding, haven't lost it. But where it gets wild is the research that was done by DSMOG shows that True North is one of the loudest and most effective anti-climate media sources in Canada in terms of social media engagement. From Morgan's perspective, it could be seen as money well spent, a quote from the article. So again, this goes to show, some might say, that some of these media organizations, content creators, they exist on a "if you give us money, we'll advance your agenda" kind of platform. We've been very critical of True North over the years because they have a content creator, Rachel Parker now, used to be Rachel Emmanuel. She's married to David Parker, and it's been proven that the two of them were coordinating, and some would say colluding, the stories that True North was producing. So, very long story short, True North appears to be for sale, in a sense, because this multi-millionaire has given them $530 million on anti-climate stuff, and they are writing anti-climate stories. So that's fun. But moving on to a feel-good story here, because it's been a week. This is going to be such a bumpy little ride, folks. I apologize, because obviously there's some things this week that are going to probably get me swearing, but we'll see what happens when we get there. Before we get there, though, Artur Pawlowski. He did not win his appeal. For those of you that are unfamiliar, Artur Pawlowski is a preacher, content creator, I guess. I think we're hitting on a theme for the show tonight. He is a self-proclaimed preacher / content creator who is got some fascinating views about the world and faith and religion. Very controversial figure, rose to prominence in particular during the COVID pandemic because he was very good at propagating, what's the word I'm looking for here? Lies. We'll go with lies about what was causing the pandemic, about the vaccines, about the WEF and global conspiracies, and. Well, Artur, at the peak of the drama, he went down to Coots to encourage the Marco Van Hogen bosses of the world to keep up the good work of fighting for people's freedom. And he got in a little bit of trouble for that, got charged with mischief, Artur did, and got convicted of mischief, Artur did, and tried to file an appeal. But the appeal was unsuccessful. In the appeal, defense lawyer Sarah Miller argued her client was communicating. He was communicating with protesters and did not incite interference with the highway that was being blocked. Arthur didn't do that. He wouldn't say that you have to hold the line or hold the fort. He definitely wouldn't say that it was their Alamo.
The line. The whole world is watching you, and it's up to you now, for the first time in 2 years, to rise up, to stand up, and to hold the forts. And if this is our Alamo, so be it. And I'm telling you, for the sake of your children, here is your opportunity to hold the fort. Do not break the line.
It's shocking, right? That with that video evidence of him telling them to mess with the highway, that they would turn around and say, "Oh no, you have you incited people to mess with the highway." So obviously the Court of Appeal disagreed. The appellate's intention was to incite others to commit physically interfering with the highway. Read the decision. You don't say. Moving on from there, we got to talk about healthcare for a second. A lot of healthcare negotiations that are going on in the province of Alberta right now with healthcare workers. A lot of healthcare workers not very happy with the contracts that are being offered by, in effect, the province. Danielle Smith reorganized Alberta Health Services so that she could, either by herself or by her minister, reach directly in and influence decisions. So there's really no argument to be made that Danielle Smith doesn't have direct influence over healthcare, because she does. And a lot of healthcare workers are very unhappy with the deals that are being offered them. We had a recent conversation with Mike Parker, president of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, where he talked about how displeased he and his membership were with the way that the provincial government was not negotiating, demanding would probably be a better word. And so there's quite a few contracts that have gone to mediation. The way the process works is you have the employer and you have the employees, and they get together in a room and they say, "Hey, let's work this out." And then if it doesn't get worked out, the next step is to go to mediation. Well, the nurses went to mediation with the province, and there was a mediation agreement that was brought forward. It was offered to the nurses originally. And it's important to highlight that when we're talking about what nurses are getting paid, the kinds of increases that nurses are seeing, and healthcare workers in general, the kind of increases that they're seeing, by and large, are what they're asking for is commensurate with what most other provinces have been paying healthcare workers in new contracts. So the union originally saw 20% and 10% increases in compensation for the first and second years of the agreement. And their argument was that members' pay increases had been either zero or less than inflation, and this is wild, for more than a decade. And when you bear in mind that that decade encompasses the COVID pandemic, and it encompasses the unnecessary disintegration of Alberta Health Services, and it encompasses the collapse of the healthcare system that is actively going on, zero or less than inflation for 10 years is pretty wild. And especially when you consider the fact that, like I said, a lot of other provinces are saying to healthcare workers, "Hey, you know what? We've got money we'll give you. We would love to give you the monies if you come here. So please come here." There is an argument to be made that you have to pay people in order to retain them. So that's what the nurses want. The government came back with proposed increases of 2% in the first and second years, and 1.7% in the third and fourth. So again, less than inflation. The nurses voted on it, and it was pretty resounding. The results here, the total voting locals, so these are the little cells of the union, if you will. Of the total voting locals, 60.48% voted yes. No voted 39.52%. But when you actually get to the members, where the rubber meets the road, yes, 38.88%, no 61.12%. 100% of locals were represented. 75.23% of members voted, and the mediation was turned down. The mediated offer was turned down. So now it's sort of back to the bargaining table. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But the rumors of the baseball terms, strikes, are already well in circulation. And honestly, I mean, I have a lot of love. Obviously, I have a bit of a bias for healthcare workers, but I got a lot of love for nurses anyways. And 2% in the first and second years and 1.75% in the third is a slap in the face. It's just embarrassing, especially when we have a government that takes a very liberal approach to spending money on other things, let's say, which brings us to the legislature. We're talking about the legislature. The legislature is back. After a remarkable amount of vacation time this year, MLAs this year had it very light in regards to their work schedule in the legislature, despite the legislative agenda that is, let's go with, problematic. And the legislature opened, as it has been. And this is interesting because we posted the video of this, and a lot of people went, wait, what? And it's true. Prayer continues to be a thing in the legislature in Alberta. Land acknowledgements, not so much, but the legislature, in the most dissonant prayer that I think I've ever heard, given the legislative agenda, and you better believe we're talking a lot about that tonight, this is what they had to say.
The prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to his government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen.
Which, again, is pretty dissonant, because when you take a look at all of the things that are listed off in the prayer, it's the opposite. They're doing the opposite of everything that they're praying for. They're doing the total opposite of it. But it wasn't just prayer that kicked off the legislature, as is the Christian fashion, I guess. I'm told. I don't know. The premier was gifted the traditional gift of a golden steak. And I don't mean a golden steak as in the foodstuffs. It's literally a giant golden nail. Jesus Christ, of course, known for his affinity for expensive golden things and also nails. Fascinating choice. But Scott Sear, the MLA who clearly is trying to get his way into the Skybox world, he offered up an explanation on the Twitter machine. He says it reflects the final act of unifying Canada from east to west, which is particularly ironic given where we're going to kind of end the show tonight. Driven into land originally stewarded by Indigenous peoples, the spike was delivered in a red box representing the plan of redemption through Jesus Christ, who calls all people to unity in his love. The gold tissue lining the box symbolizes the Lord's presence over Alberta and his power to bring people together under his grace. I gotta be honest here. I grew up in the Anglican church. And so I read the book a few times, and from what I recall, and I'm happy to be corrected, either in the chat or you can send a DM. I don't believe that the Jesus was in pursuit of the gold. I don't know that was his jam. I'm fairly certain it wasn't. So if anything, the deep symbolism that appears to be behind presenting the premier with a golden steak is just wealth and not doesn't seem to be too in line with the teachings of the man, from what I remember. And then we got to the legislation, and this is all very bad. But we're going to start with the Bill of Rights, kind of. And the reason why I say the Bill of Rights, kind of, is because the Bill of Rights was introduced on October 28th. Now, again, there's been a lot of confusion in the province of Alberta about the Bill of Rights because there's been a bunch of different versions of the Bill of Rights that have been talked about. We've talked on the show before about the LifeSite News version of the Bill of Rights that said that it was going to try to outlaw abortion. Okay, that one didn't come to fruition. The story remains up. It hasn't been retracted. So whether or not the UCP's version was edited or something else, who knows? But we got to talk about the difference between the two that remain standing. I guess the first one is the Alberta Bill of Rights. And the changes are ironic, but the wording is very important. The right for an individual with capacity. Oh, there's that with capacity thing that we predicted they were going to lean into months ago. Not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, medical treatment, or medical procedure without consent unless that individual is likely to cause substantial harm to themselves or to others. A lot of people were asking the question, hey, how are they going to get around the anti-vax freedoms of you can't get forced to have a treatment? How are they going to reconcile that with forced treatment? And apparently it's going to be based on the determination, not sure by whom, of capacity. So that's the first piece. The next piece that we got to talk about, the right of an individual with, again, capacity to not be compelled or coerced into receiving a vaccine. Now, this is, again, a major change in language, because compelled is a word that is wildly open to interpretation. Compelled can mean, hey, I think you should do this, Timmy. Compelled can include peer pressure. It's a very, very broad word. The coercion part, that's pretty clear. Compelled, not so much. Moving on. The right to freedom of expression, broadening the scope of Albertans' rights protected beyond written and spoken language to include other expressive activities. So I guess interpretive dance finally gets its due. The right to acquire, keep, and use firearms in accordance with the law, and they put that in bold, reinforcing the right to lawful ownership and affirming Alberta government intent that provincial laws should not interfere with the right to own legally acquired firearms. Expanded property rights. If an individual or entity is derived of the enjoyment of their property, this would need to be authorized by law. So it's about vaccines and it's about guns, even though guns are federal jurisdiction. And this is another one of those areas where it's really the messaging that comes from the UCP is quite dissonant, because on one hand, they say, hey, you know what, federal government, you should stay in your lane. You should leave us alone. Don't legislate in areas that aren't yours. And then they introduce legislation that is decidedly not in their lane. And the response from Smith and co. has been, well, I guess we'll see the feds in court. If the feds have a problem with it, they can sue us. So it's almost as if there's some, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for here, hypocrisy that's going on in regards to the rules of engagement. That's the version 1.0 of the Bill of Rights that was introduced in the legislature. Now, super important to highlight that there's a very different Bill of Rights and Freedoms that has been circulating. This is the Black Hat Gang. We copied our homework off the United States Bill of Rights. This is the one that has 22 points, including all kinds of fascinating things. We get back to the guns, freedom to keep and bear arms, freedom of parents to make decisions concerning the health, welfare, education, and upbringing of their children, freedom of speech, expression, and from private and public censorship of any form, the right to life, liberty, pursuit, life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of, like, they just copied the American Bill of Rights in so many ways. It's kind of lazy, but why does this get to be relevant? Well, because one of the things that's happened over the course of this whole conversation is in the background, the Black Hat gang introduced the Bill of Rights to the party president and said, hey, we love this. You should love it too. And the party president said, I do love it. I think everybody should love it. So I'm just going to circumvent the entire policy vetting rules that we've had in place for the UCP to get this thing on the floor. I'm just going to break the rules because I think that a small group of people should be able to get around all of our own rules to bring this document to be voted on, to be accepted. He then stacked the deck by saying that he had presented it to the provincial board of the UCP, and they all endorsed it, so everybody should endorse it. It's just delightful. Caused quite a bit of consternation within the party. There were calls for the president's resignation. So it's complicated. But where it gets interesting is there were a lot of people who lit their hair on fire when they saw the official version that the UCP had put in with those like 3 or 4 points. They didn't have the 22 points written founding father style. A lot of people are upset about that. And it turns out the Black Hat gang decided to have some conversations, allegedly, because posted to one of the Telegram groups, good news, the Black Hats, LeVar Payne, Scott Payne, and Mitch Silvestri met with Minister Amory this morning, and this was the result. So make sure, and anyone concerned about Bill 24, which is the Bill of Rights Amendment, write to Danielle, Amory, and your MLA, unless it's an NDP. Don't write to them. And then the text that was shared, the government has tabled Bill 24 until after the AGM and is asking for members for their feedback. So the implication there is that the Black Hat gang was able to strong arm the Minister of Justice into pausing a bill in front of the legislature, which is fascinating because one of the other conversations that has come up over the last couple of press conferences is why the timing of all of these bills. And of course, the timing is absolutely transparent. The timing is because Danielle Smith knew that she was going to have a leadership review, and she really, 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 really wanted to pass that leadership review. So she brought in the worst of the worst policies that the UCP membership had voted forward to that point in time to make sure that she got her leadership re-upped. But she won't admit that. She won't say, oh, yeah, no, I was totally doing everything. She said in multiple press conferences, the reason why everything happened the way that it did is because, there's just so many legislative changes that need to be made. So you have to get everything front. Got to get the ball rolling, guys. And yet here we have the Black Hat gang effectively getting the government to press pause on their bill pending the results of that leadership review and the UCP's policy convention, which, yes, we're absolutely going to be talking about. But before we get into that, we got to talk a little bit about some of the press conferences that happened, because it's legislative session time. So we got to pick fights with the federal government again. And Danielle Smith and co. did not disappoint. They announced that they were suing the feds over the rebate on heating oil that is being provided to, well, the whole country, but only people who use heating oil really get the benefit of it. So a little bit of background. A couple years ago, well, not that long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals came forward and they said, ooh, cost of living. Yeah, that is a real problem. Ooh, carbon tax on heating oil. Ooh, that is a real problem too. We're gonna not so much with the carbon tax on the heating oil. We're gonna give exemptions for heating oil for home use because that is expensive. And a lot of the people who live in the places that use heating oil don't have the infrastructure to get things like natural gas, just by nature of living in remote locations. It's not an option. And lots of places in Eastern Canada use heating oil. Lots of the coasts both use heating oil pretty effectively. They use it a lot. Words didn't work there. And Danielle Smith and the UCP said, "Oh, that's not fair. We don't use heating oil." And this is where it gets, let's go with super dignified, not really. Because one of the questions that came up in the press conference in regard to the heating oil had to do with, again, finance minister. This is the finance minister. This is the person whose words can have a very real impact on the economy. They asked him about some of the words that he used not too long ago.
You were on national television saying you were absolutely serious that you wanted to bring in a incentive program to encourage Albertans to get home heating oil. If you were indeed absolutely serious about it, what happened to that investigation?
Well, I think I said I was deadly serious, but I was deadly serious about making a point, and I think I did. As the Premier and the Minister have said, you know, Alberta uses natural gas. It's a cleaner burning fuel. If the market signals from the federal government want to push people towards using diesel and heating fuel to heat their homes, that's ridiculous. So that's the point I was making. But yeah, we don't make policy decisions in the middle of interviews.
We don't make policy decisions in the middle of interviews. That would be ridiculous. We do that at exclusive UCP town halls. That's where we make our policy announcements and our policy decisions, because that's what Danielle Smith did all summer. But what was the clip referencing? Was Mr. Horner? It's not like he made a flippant offhand comment and it was just that. Like, he certainly didn't double down. He certainly didn't end his interview on a national news broadcast by doubling down on it, did he?
Offensive to Canadians to look at a small subsection of the population that's using the most expensive heating fuel and finding a way to give them some help?
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely, it is. And I'll tell you something else. I'm happy for my cousins in the Maritimes that are getting this affordability. Everybody across the country should be receiving affordability measures from this government coming into winter on a tax that doesn't work anyways. But I just did another interview following a Liberal MP from Alberta who was telling me that I should take policy seriously. So something just came to me, and I'll share it with you too. I think Alberta should pursue a subsidy where we will help if Albertans want to convert from natural gas to home heating oil. Maybe we'll help with one-time costs to pursue that. If this is such sharp policy, maybe we should follow suit.
Well, I mean, it's only a 3-year exemption, or so they say, and there's actually more people outside of Atlantic Canada. When you look at the people in Ontario, the North, and Western Canada, I know it doesn't apply to Alberta in any meaningful way, who burn home heating oil, if you look at the math provided. So it is a national program. I take your point, though, politically, this was driven by concerns in Atlantic Canada, and that's what caused this to happen. But the doubling of the rural rebate, for example, the top up there on carbon pricing, that will apply in your province. Is that of benefit, do you see, for the people of rural Alberta on this?
There is no benefit for the people of rural Alberta for this carbon tax. It is absolutely punitive to rural Canada. I've expressed this to this federal government in my previous roles as the agriculture minister. It is absolutely ridiculous. Charge the people who use the most, that have no alternative means to heat their poultry barns, to pump water, to irrigate, to dry their grain, and then disperse it amongst the people that might have a choice with how they live. It is absolutely the craziest policy they could ever have. And that's why the more I think about it, I'm deadly serious about this subsidy to convert from natural gas to home heating oil. You can expect it to be coming.
Now, watching that clip, it's pretty clear that there were a lot of people who walked away from that and went, really? Is he serious? I can't tell if he's serious. And that's the problem. Because if you're the minister of a government and you think you're being clever by having a petulant little temper tantrum on a national news program, not only are you creating unnecessary uncertainty, you're presenting yourself as somebody who maybe doesn't need to be taken that seriously as well. And you're certainly not doing the office which you occupy. You're not providing it the respect that it's due. So, I mean, if you watch real closely, you can see a couple of little smirks from Nate Horner there. He's like, "Oh, I got a good one in there. I did." But it's, again, is this the kind of representation that we're expecting to have in the province of Alberta? Obviously open to some debate. But at that same press conference, there were a bunch of other questions that came up about impending bills that everybody knew at that time were coming.
Does the government intend to apply the notwithstanding clause on any of the legislation it will table on transgender issues?
We're trying to find the right balance. We've already indicated in our policy, our Bill of Rights, that parents have the right to determine the education for their kids. So we think that the court will be mindful of that as we're bringing through some of the notification provisions in the Education Act. And I think it's been pretty clearly, I think, established in law that young children do not have the mental capacity to make their healthcare decisions until they become of an age of maturity. So we think that that is likely to be compliant with the law as well. And we also are we have also heard that women and girls need protection in their ability to participate in sport. And so we're not anticipating having to use a notwithstanding clause. We think we found a reasonable balance.
Now, this is an interesting line because Danielle Smith has been recently very vague and in regards to whether or not should we consider using the notwithstanding clause for these issues. She's straight up said that when it comes to forced treatment, she will absolutely use the notwithstanding clause for that. She has said that multiple times on the record, so there's no questions about that. But what's her intention to use the notwithstanding clause in regards to these policies that quite literally represent a rollback of the human rights of trans folks and trans youth? The closest she's come to answering that question was shortly after she announced the policies in the first place. And we have that clip right here.
You stand on invoking the notwithstanding clause if it comes to that. Will you do that?
I hope it doesn't come to that. I mean, we're putting this forward with the best interests of the child in mind, and we believe that the child's best interests are served by having a supportive family walking every step of the way with them. We believe the child's best interest is served by making sure that when they're making decisions, that it doesn't have it's not irreversible until they're of an age where they're prepared to live with the consequences of that. So I think because of those aspects, I would hope that that this is supported. That's the spirit with which we've gone into it, is to making sure that we're protecting children's rights and children's choices.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of bullshit there. Basically, everything that she tried to present as facts are not actual facts. They've been disproven. So good talk there, I guess. But also the notion that this is in some bizarro world way an attempt to protect kids' rights by taking away the rights of those kids and their parents and their medical team to make medically informed decisions to treat actual things. That's obviously bullshit too. I think I'm going to be saying bullshit a lot this episode. But those are the big clips that came out of the home heating oil lawsuit. There are more clips coming, rest assured, but we're going to try to do the week in a little bit of a chronological order. One of the other big announcements that came this week had to do with the sheriffs. Sheriffs are coming to town. There's an expansion to the sheriffs. Danielle Smith's provincial police force, the second provincial police force. Danielle Smith is on the record saying that. This is not hyperbole. These are literally her words. So building out the provincial police force that is the sheriffs now. The government is now expanding the Alberta Sheriff's Safer Communities and Neighborhoods, or SCAN unit, with the creation of a new team of investigators in Red Deer. There's already a SCAN team in Calgary. There's one in Edmonton. And the creation of the Red Deer SCAN team is the latest in a series of measures aimed at enhancing public safety and increasing the Alberta Sheriff's ability to support police throughout the province. Now, again, this is a bit of... There's a lot of questions to be asked in regards to what the intent is with the sheriffs, because on one hand, Danielle Smith has said, "Hey, you know what? I want the sheriffs to be there to supplement. I want them to support the existing police that are out there doing the policing things." On the other hand, she straight up said that she wants them to be able to replace the RCMP. And if a municipality wants to have a sheriff's detachment as opposed to an RCMP detachment, well, that's something that they should be allowed to do, right? Totally disregarding the massive difference in training that exists that even sheriffs will happily own. We've gotten multiple DMs from folks in the sheriffs who have said, yeah, the notion that we get the same amount of training as the city police or the RCMP is just not true. It is false. It is more than a couple of weeks. It is way more than that. So even sheriffs aren't entirely comfortable with the notion of becoming the replacement for the RCMP. But depending on what day you ask Danielle Smith what she's hoping to do with the sheriffs, the answer tends to change. It's going to be something that we're going to be watching very, very closely over the coming weeks and months. And now we get into the gross. Everybody has known since the beginning of this year that Danielle Smith was going to be introducing a suite of anti-trans policies. And she did this week. She introduced 3 bills through her ministers. But she introduced 3 bills: Bill 26, the Health Statutes Amendment Act, Bill 27, the Education Amendment Act, and Bill 29, the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act. And this created a boatload of controversy. Now, we're going to be careful. We're going to be deliberate about how we approach the clips from the presser. There are going to be some things that we are choosing to leave out, because one of the things, I'll speak for myself, one of the things that I hold to be very true with this government is they act in bad faith. They just do. And when you start to take a look at the press conference, the supporting characters of the press conference, it gets really tragic really quickly. And after a lot of discussion here on the show, we believe that there are some very deliberate traps that Danielle Smith and co. have tried to set up for anyone who's going to be critical of the props that she used, the human props that she used to try to shield herself and these bills from criticism. We did do a little bit of a deep dive on the Twitter machine on one of the individuals, and it's just also tragic and sad that we're not going to do that here on this episode. If you want to, you can go on the Twitter machine and you can find that stuff. But we're not going to go super far into the weeds on that tonight. But we are going to talk about some of the things that the Danielle Smith said, because there are some things that need to be addressed. And there are some things that have already been rebutted by, again, the actual experts. Smith made a lot of comments that were inflammatory. She made a lot of comments that were demonstrably false. And we're going to try to unpack just some of them tonight. And we have to start with this one.
Prohibiting hormone therapy, and is prohibiting doctors from prescribing hormone therapy or puberty blockers to minors. But isn't that a direct attack on their medical independence? What if they really think that it's for the best of their well-being of their patients for them to prescribe that type of drug?
Look, doctors were given a lot of latitude to prescribe opioids. And now we have a fentanyl crisis as a result of inappropriate prescribing. And we've had to put guardrails around who can prescribe opioids, how they can be delivered. And I would say doctors aren't always right. This has supreme consequences on young people, on their ability to, if you're medicalized for life, it has consequences. If you are medicalized too early, it has consequences on fertility. And we believe that sometimes you have to step in and make sure that you're preserving choice and protecting the rights of kids so that they can make those decisions as adults.
Now, there's a lot of bullshit there. There's a lot of bullshit there. And it's quite frankly profoundly offensive that Danielle Smith would try to lay the totality of why we have a fentanyl crisis at the feet of physicians. But I'm not gonna do the response because the Alberta Medical Association, yet again, and I should not have to say yet again, I shouldn't have to say that. It's mind-blowing that I live in a province, as does most of our audience, where I can say the Alberta Medical Association had to call out the Premier again this week, but the Alberta Medical Association had to call out the Premier again this week. The AMA physicians' response to comments made by Premier today in the media availability regarding the opioid crisis. Regarding the opioid crisis, physicians are not the reason for the crisis. As noted in a 2022 study from the Stanford Lancet Commission, the crisis represents a multi-system failure in regulation. OxyContin was falsely marketed by Purdue and approved by the regulator, triggering the first waves of deaths. The heroin market then expanded to attract people who are already addicted to prescription medications, with a recent third wave of deaths from illegal synthetic opioid like fentanyl contaminating the drug supply. Sadly, the pandemic amplified these deaths. Industry completely failed to fulfill its role to educate and advise prescribers on how to evaluate and mitigate risk, while the opioid manufacturers continue to influence government regulatory agencies. While some physician prescribing around chronic pain may have led to an increase in opioid use disorder, it was done with the best evidence at the time, in a manner which was best supporting patients who had severe pain concerns. Physicians have responded swiftly and appropriately to later evidence with changes in prescribing patterns under oversight of our own regulator. Regarding changes to gender care, hormone blockers are not addictive, and they are usually stopped after a few years without any significant side effects, including effects on fertility. In fact, hormone blockers have no effect on fertility. Let us be clear that adolescents are not making these decisions in isolation, and parents are involved in the decision-making. These changes actually impinge on the rights of parents to make medical decisions for their children whom they know the best. Alberta's healthcare system is strained, and the focus must be on comprehensive, lifelong care. We need to stick to evidence-based approaches when dealing with medical matters. That is signed by Dr. Monty Ghosh, section of addiction medicine, and Dr. Sam Wong, the section of pediatrics for the Alberta Medical Association. Again, this should not be needed. But this is the problem that we have in this province. Danielle Smith is far too comfortable listening to everybody and giving all of those voices equal weight, which they do not deserve. That's a difficult thing for some people to hear because everybody wants to be an expert on everything, but it's simply not the case. If somebody was to ask me the best way to change a transmission on a 2008 F-150, I could probably, you got to do the things with the tools. And I could sound like I might know what I'm talking about. I would 100% be wrong. You should not come to someone like me to ask how to change the transmission on a 2008 F-150, because I guarantee I would ruin it. My voice and my opinion on transmission changing of, anything really, should not be given equal weight to a mechanic who has spent 20, 30 years changing transmissions. There are some areas that just have expertise, and that's not a bad thing. That's something that we should be grateful for. And it's tragic that we have a premier who will give every voice equal weight. We saw this with the chemtrails, where Danielle Smith was starting to try to explain to someone, well, actually, the chemtrails thing, not so much a thing. But because she couldn't handle the sense of losing that room for just half a second, instead of being honest, she kicked it to the U.S. Department of Defense. She's doing the same thing with puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy. She's just making shit up to please her base. And the fact that the head of the section of addiction medicine and the head of the section of pediatrics have to write a rapid response social media post in order to debunk dumb stuff Danny says yet again should give everybody a whole lot of concern. But that was by far not the only dumb thing that Danny said at that press conference.
In provisions, there's already the right for parents to remove their child from class if they don't want to be taught that. But a lot of educators are saying this is going to add a hurdle. They might not even bring in plans. So why, when 1 in 3 Albertans are sexually abused under the age of 18 and STI rates are skyrocketing, why put barriers in place to receiving education on sexuality?
Well, look, I mean, I think the problem has become that all of these things are intermingled, and it may well be that parents would opt into one type of sex education and not another, and that's their right. Under the School Act, we have a specific policy that parents have the right to choose what their children are exposed to, and we're just adding this additional provision. I would say it's no more complicated than getting parental buy-in on a field trip, which happens a lot, that you have to send home and get consent forms for a field trip. So I don't think it's going to be any additional work. They have processes in place to be able to get the opt-in on each of these instances for structured education. And I think parents need to know, especially because I think parents want to be able to talk to their kids, and when they do opt in, want to be able to talk to their kids about it afterwards. That shouldn't be something that's a surprise to parents. Parents should be fully informed on all instances, and that's what we've heard from parents that they want, and that's what we'll deliver on.
Again, and this is deep sigh, a source of unending frustration, because this is Danielle Smith abdicating leadership. She's saying, you know what? I don't want to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do. Somebody might mistake that for leadership, and then my whole reputation would just be destroyed. That's what's happening here. People in positions of leadership are supposed to lead, and part of them leading is communicating what are good choices, what are evidence-based choices. Using the AMA as an example, Dr. Modi Ghosh and Dr. Sam Wong stepping up and saying, hey, this is bullshit. We should be, I'm paraphrasing, of course, they didn't include that, although it would have been awesome if they did. Them saying we need to stick to evidence-based approaches when dealing with medical matters. That is leadership. They are saying we need to be making these decisions based on evidence, not based on things that might go bump in the night. And Danielle responds to the question of, we have a problem with STIs in this province. We have a problem with kids being abused in this province. Why are you making it harder for people to access information that can address both of those things? Her response to say, it's no different than a field trip. I don't want to tell parents how to access education. It's no more difficult than getting a field trip form signed. I mean, first of all, getting a field trip form signed is not that easy. You can talk to parents, you can talk to teachers, and teachers will be happy to tell you that one of the things that they love dealing with the least is getting the form signed and getting them back, because there's all kinds of little dynamic things that happen in that process where those forms don't get signed for things like field trips, Danny. But if you really want to put the absolute cherry on top, if there is anybody who theoretically should be able to wrap their heads around why sex ed is so important in the province of Alberta, one would think that a former member of the Calgary Board of Education, cough, Danielle Smith, cough, would have some inkling. But as we're going to prove in just a little bit here, it doesn't matter what Danny knows or what she thinks she knows. It just all evaporates as soon as it's politically expedient to have it evaporate. But it gets worse.
Of conditions and treatments in childhood that have lifelong impacts that can affect fertility. I'm wondering why for this specifically you want to remove that parental right to make that decision with the doctor and the parent and the child.
Well, look, we've had a couple of recent instances where an individual has been sterilized without their knowledge, consent, or understanding by someone else, and then we've had to pay compensation for it. When governments in the past made the decision to sterilize individuals determined to be mentally feeble, that ultimately resulted in a massive lawsuit and compensation. Right now, there were hearings in the Senate of Indigenous women who want criminal code sanction for doctors who made the decision to sterilize them. I'm watching with great interest how that proceeds. So 20 years from now, if we were to have children sterilized, they will come back and say, who's responsible? And we just do not believe that this is something that's appropriate. A person has the right to determine their own fertility. Another person cannot decide that on their behalf. And we have to be able to protect the right of kids to be able to make those choices when they're adults.
Let me go back to that statement from the good folks at the Alberta Medical Association here. Hormone blockers are not addictive, and they're usually stopped after a few years without any significant side effects, including effects on fertility. In fact, hormone blockers have no effect on fertility. So, at the very least, she's lying again. But to try to equate a youth who's navigating gender dysphoria under medical supervision with their parents' consent, with the deliberate decisions to remove a person's ability to procreate, is not only a false equivalency, it's also an incredibly gross line of reasoning. The mentally feeble that were sterilized with that being the goal. The goal was these people shouldn't have kids, so we're going to take away their ability to have kids. When we're talking about the forced sterilization of Indigenous and First Nations women, we're talking about somebody coming in and saying, I do not believe that this person should be able to have kids. I'm going to take that away from them. That is an entire universe apart from we're treating a medical condition under medical supervision. There is consent. There is informed consent. The parents are involved. A multidisciplinary healthcare team is involved. As with any medical treatment, there are always going to be some side effects. But that's not the goal. And the fact that Danielle Smith seems to think that treating gender dysphoria appropriately with medications as per the best medical evidence is in any way comparable to the deliberate decision to remove a person's ability to have kids as the only goal speaks to how profoundly she does not understand what's actually going on here. And it also speaks to how disqualified she should be from even having a voice in this conversation. Because if she can't wrap her head around the difference between deliberately taking away somebody's ability to have kids and deliberately treating a medical condition where the side effects that she's referring to are exceptionally rare, if ever, it should be disqualifying. But here she is introducing her legislation nonetheless. And this is where it gets really wild. Because she was asked, and we've got the receipts on this, she was asked about consultation.
For taking my question. This morning at the technical briefing, it was confirmed that these pieces of legislation will apply to two-spirit youth as well. So I was wondering if you and your government has consulted with Indigenous individuals or organizations.
Well, what I would say is that our legislation only applies to the schools that are off reserve schools. First Nations or separate nations, they have their ability to create their own policies. And this will apply to anyone who is in a school that we do have the mandate to govern. I personally think that all parents want to know what's going on with their kids, regardless of whether they come from Indigenous households or non-Indigenous households. So I would expect that would be something that would be an expectation on the part of First Nations parents. And I believe that it doesn't change the decision. If you have a level of maturity that you want to get to before you start medically transitioning, it doesn't matter what your race is.
Premier, respectfully, you didn't answer my question. So were Indigenous organizations and individuals consulted before deciding that these policies will include two-spirit youth?
Well, as I said, it doesn't have an impact on First Nations. We don't govern First Nations, so they'll be able to make their own decisions.
Because, don't you know, First Nations people only live on the res. There's no First Nations people who live anywhere other than the res or have kids anywhere other than the res. Don't you know? It's just mind-boggling that that's the argument that she decided to go with. The First Nations, according to Danielle Smith, based on what she just said there, First Nations are quite literally only the geographic spaces that have been allowed by treaty to maintain as First Nations reservations. Those are the only, it's not the people that are the First Nations. It's not the culture that are the First Nations. It's just those little spaces that people are allowed to have as reservations. Those are the First Nations. It is mind-boggling. And the frustrating part is, of course, she didn't answer the question about the consultation because we already know she didn't. How do we know? Because as we've addressed on multiple previous episodes, we filed a FOIP. And in that FOIP, we asked a very simple question. We wanted to know what were all the organizations that Danielle Smith had consulted, what was the process for determining who was going to be consulted. And we got back roughly 100 pages of 900 relevant pages. And all of those pages, they didn't include a lot of information because there was personal information of conversations that did happen. That's fine. But what we did get made it very, very clear. The consultation, the only consultation that occurred in regards to how to implement these policies. When Danielle Smith made these policy announcements at the beginning of this year, she had already decided, and she had, by and large, decided in a silo. There was no consultation that was done because we didn't get any records until after she made that announcement. And we went all the way back to January 1st of 2023, and there were no records of any consultation. So, no, she didn't consult. And in fact, as we've addressed when we got that FOIP, we did I think like 3/4 of an episode on it. As we addressed in that episode, she identified in that consultation, which was not cheap, by the way, they identified that all of the experts, including parents and trans youth, would be against these policies. So they knew the entirety of healthcare thought that these policies were bad and would be bad. They knew that everybody affected by these policies thought they were bad and they would be bad. They just didn't care to consult because it's not about what's evidence-based. It's not about what's logical or what makes sense. It's about appeasing a base. It's about playing to the lowest common denominator. And as we're going to get to in just a few minutes, you're going to see just how low that common denominator actually is. One more clip.
And I know that you and your government have spoken to various people from the LGBTQ community in reference to this. Can you speak to people or organizations who perhaps are in opposition to your legislation that you consulted with? Did you get a well-rounded view of this issue and the people that it affects before you introduced these policies?
Yeah, we did do a roundtable, and the individuals at the table who shared our concerns were bullied and condemned and canceled. And so we realized that not every voice is going to be constructive in this conversation. So we reached out to every constructive voice that we wanted to, who we felt would come to the table in a respectful way and be respectful of the people who were around the table as well. And I sure hope that the brave people behind me don't end up with the same kind of bullying when they leave here today.
We reached out to every constructive voice that we wanted to. Just let that marinate for a sec. We reached out to every constructive voice that we wanted to. One of the things that we did when we did our Skybox episode, the last week's episode, one of the things that we did is we did something called a red team. And basically what that is when you have something that you think is going to be controversial, you have a group of people do everything that they can to poke holes in it. You have a group of people try to absolutely rip it apart. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do. Danny didn't do that. Danny had every constructed voice that she wanted. And if there were people who, okay, let's just do this. Let's just do this then, because we're talking about a fairly select identified group. I'm going to get in trouble. And we're talking about a couple people that everybody knows, everybody who's been paying close attention to this file knows who it is that Danielle Smith is referring to. And there is a term, a title that is used. And I'm not going to use the term in the title, but it is reflective of individuals who are so traumatized and insecure that they will do anything for a sense of belonging and a sense of validation. And that is tragic. And that is absolutely the last type of person that the Premier of Alberta should be choosing to use as a human shield for these sorts of policies. And if the arguments that those people are advancing are wrong and in bad faith, there is nothing wrong with other people saying, hey, your argument is flawed and it's in bad faith and you're lying. There's nothing wrong with saying that. And when these people choose to hold themselves up in the public circle, the public space, and say, hey, everybody, I know the things, you should listen to me, I would hope that they would get scrutinized. I would hope that the episode that we put out last week, where we went through the many layers of financial interests that overlap with the current UCP government and the Venn diagram that is those layers and Skybox tickets, I would hope that that would be scrutinized. I would hope that every word that I say on this show is scrutinized. I accept that as part of the role of saying, I'm going to stand in front of this microphone and do things for a couple of hours. The people that Danielle Smith is talking about were not bullied. They were criticized. And they were criticized because of what they said and how they chose to say it. And this is the problem with elevating voices and relying on voices that do not have the expertise, that do not have the knowledge, they do not have the training. Sometimes those people are not prepared, either with facts or for what the response is going to be when you start punching down on vulnerable youth that are disproportionately at risk of suicide. If you can't handle the heat of that conversation and you're going to go into that conversation in bad faith and lie, oh well, I have a really hard time feeling sorry for you because you're hurting kids for some sense of validation that I can't wrap my head around. And we're going to talk about just how obvious that is. I promise we will in just a couple minutes. There was no consultation. There was affirmation. And that's it. But there is always that undercurrent of dog whistles. There's always that undercurrent of, I can't quite say the thing. I can't quite say because I can't prove it because there's no proof for it. But I'm going to say the thing in a way. And we saw that in the legislature from the Chestermere Strathmore MLA, Chantal DeJong.
Of sport on health and well-being and sport's known ability to build lifelong healthy habits for participants, and considering the decline in numbers of women and girls participating in sport after reaching puberty, and our government's commitment to making sport safe, fair and accessible for all Albertans, to the Minister of Tourism and Sport, can you please explain what the government is doing to protect and promote Albertan women and girls in sport?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism and Sport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sports is for everyone, recreation is for everyone, and the impacts and the lessons that we learn playing sports and recreating last us a lifetime. But there is an alarming trend happening in Alberta right now and across the province and across the country that young girls are dropping out of sports around the age of 12, 13 at puberty at an alarming rate. And Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure that those young girls have a place to play. And I am not in a position, nor will I be in one, to allow inclusion to be, to allow safety and fairness to be sacrificed at the expense of inclusion. And if we're willing to wait one more sleep, we'll have legislation coming forward on that.
Now, we could ignore the fact that Joseph Schau apparently couldn't stumble his way through that sentence without putting up, at least I counted 2 double negatives. So we could do a whole bit on that, but we're not going to, because the subtext of what they said, oh, you know what, guys, the young girls, they're just not doing the sports anymore. They're not doing the sports anymore. And we have to make sure that the young girls, they can do the sports still, because leadership and teams and everything like that. And so that's why we have to bring forward these changes that exclude trans participants in sports, because you see the connection that they're making without saying it there. The implication of that whole exchange is the reason that young women, young girls aren't pursuing sports is because they're afraid of trans people. And there's no evidence to support that. There's none. And they're not able to produce any evidence to support that. But they'll word things in a fun little way to sure make it sound like that's the problem. Not the cost of doing sports. Not the time commitment of doing sports, not the overwhelming work of just being a teenager, not parents who are exhausted because they're working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. That's not the reason why young girls are not pursuing extracurricular sports. It's not that. It's not the cost. It's not the time commitment. It's not the effort. Don't you see? It's the trans folks. That's what they're saying. And they're just lying. And this is where we're going to play a couple more clips, because there was one, and it's longer, but it's important. So we're going to play the whole thing. In fact, we're going to play 2 longer clips. One of them, for our audio listeners, I'm going to apologize. The second one that we're going to play, there's some dead spaces in it. It's not that your phone stopped working. We're leaving the dead spaces in because it's important for the video. And it's important for the perceived authenticity of what's being said in the second clip. But I want to talk about the first clip first. Because NDP MLA Janice Irwin, who we'd love to have on the show, by the way, Janice, if you're listening, NDP MLA Janice Irwin stood up and she delivered an incredibly powerful statement in the legislature. And I don't think that anybody is going to be able to articulate the things that Janice Irwin articulated in this statement any better than she did. So we're just going to let that whole statement play.
Member, I believe these decisions are very personal and should not be debated in public. We shouldn't be making any child feel like the issues they're struggling with are something that is a political football. Those are powerful words, but they're not mine. They're this Premier's only 2 years ago. I think of that person, that Premier, the same one who tearfully pleaded in this chamber a decade ago that supporting queer and trans youth really is a case of life or death, noting that so many young people have nowhere else to go if they're not accepted by their community and not accepted at home. She shared stories from youth who faced rejection and abuse at home, but now she falsely claims these circumstances are rare, despite the fact that 30% of trans and non-binary youth report being rejected by their families after coming out. Something has changed for this Premier, and it's unconscionable that she plans to attack the rights and safety of transgender Albertans with not 1, but 3 pieces of harmful legislation. With an opportunity to be a real leader in one of the best places to live in this world, the Premier is instead choosing to attack our vulnerable friends and family members. And for what? A few votes for her own leadership ambitions? I think of this Premier's own words 10 years ago. Live and let live. That was her mantra. She said, to me, it comes down to choice. I'm not interested in imposing my views on anyone any more than I'm interested in having their views imposed upon me. Premier, trans people aren't a threat. They're not a problem to be fixed, and choosing to put them at risk by presenting them as a problem is wrong. We hear from Albertans every day about their priorities, and this isn't one of them. Albertans want a strong public health care system, well-funded education, affordable housing, good-paying jobs. They want a government that takes human rights seriously and protects these rights. It's not too late for the Premier to change course, to admit she's wrong and do the right thing. Let's make Albertans, including trans Albertans, proud to live here. Make your former self proud, Premier. That's right.
Compliments of the Twitter account Disordered YYC. We have part of that 2014 statement that Janice Irwin was referring to. Now, there's 2 things that I want to draw your attention to if you're watching this clip, if you're listening to it. The dead space is there because Danielle Smith could not get all of the words out. So the 2 things that I want to draw your attention to, first of all, the fact that the speaker did such a generous job of creating space for Danielle Smith to try to compose herself so that she could speak to something that at the time, it certainly looked like she cared a great deal about. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to is who is sitting behind her.
Didn't know that they were out yet. Most of them knew that if their parents knew, that there'd be some consequences to that. One individual I spoke with, she said that 2 lesbian girls had come out at her school and had been kicked out of the school. Another young boy told me that he came out to his parents and his dad rejected him.
Just going to pause for a moment while we get a door closed up there. Sergeants, if you could close that door, please. We could hear some interruptions coming from there. Sorry to interrupt you, Honourable Member, but please proceed.
Another young woman was beaten by her father. So while I respect that we need to find a balance with parental rights and with religious freedom, I think we need to also respect that in the case of these mature youths, this really is a case of life or death for some of them. We really do have a number of youths who have nowhere else to go if they're not accepted by their community, not accepted in their home environment.
Danielle Smith does not get to plead ignorance. Danielle Smith doesn't get to stand up at a podium or a lectern and say, oh, I think all parents are going to do the best. Oh, I think that all parents are going to, they're going to embrace their kids and help them through this journey. She doesn't get to do that because she knows it's not true. Now, let's be clear. The vast majority of parents, one can only hope that the vast majority of parents will show up for their kids and they will love their kids no matter what. But the simple fact that we have to have an organization that is designed to protect children that are being abused by their parents demonstrates not all parents do that. Parents do abuse their kids. Parents do hit their kids. Danielle Smith knows that. She read those words into the record of the legislature. So she does not get to stand up in front of anyone and say, oh, all parents are just going to love their kids so hard, because she knows better. She is lying in the worst and ugliest of ways that I can quite frankly imagine. And the fact that she is turning a willful, blind eye to the abuse of some of the most vulnerable kids out there is something that she is going to have to live with for the rest of her life. And the reason why I wanted those of you who are watching to pay attention to who was sitting behind her, looking so empathetic, looking so sincere. The person sitting behind her was Bruce McAllister. What did Bruce McAllister have to say about these sorts of issues this weekend? Well, when the Western Standard tweeted out Alberta UCP members pass motion to limit female spaces to biological females, Bruce McAllister tweets out, your words are hard, apparently. You're damn right we did, ! Bruce McAllister now taking pride and glee in punching down. Which brings us to the UCP AGM. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who want to believe the best possible interpretation of things. But the reality is, coming out of this UCP AGM, the party has defined itself in a way that we went back and we couldn't find very many policy conventions where every single policy, every single one that was brought forward was passed. It's a very, very, very rare thing, especially at a convention where you've got like 5,000 people showing up. That is not a common occurrence. But here's the thing. Every single policy that was brought forward at the UCP AGM when it comes to their policies that they believe should be issues. These are the policies that Danielle Smith has made a commitment to bringing forward to legislation. Now, there's a lot of people who like to say, you know what, historically speaking, just because a policy isn't a thing or a policy is voted on at a policy convention, that doesn't mean that it's going to be actually a thing. But the UCP under Danielle Smith has seen a marked departure from that. You take a look at the policies that were passed at last year's UCP AGM, and you take a look at the current legislative agenda, it's a pretty one-for-one lineup. And again, 5,000, give or take, UCP members descended on Red Deer to vote in their policy convention and vote for Danielle Smith's leadership. Now, Danielle Smith, unsurprisingly, passed her leadership. But that's not what the story is here. That's what they're trying to make the story be. They're trying to say that the story here is Danielle Smith got 91.5% from the people who attended, the 5,000 people who attended the UCP AGM. So she's got this huge mandate from the 5,000 people that showed up. That is not the story here. The story that people should be talking about is the fact that every single policy that hit the floor at the UCP AGM was passed. And you're damn right we're going to be taking a look at what some of those policies are, because we need to be talking about who this party has chosen to define themselves as being. Policies number 1 and 23 that go down on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ensure that all hiring practices within the Alberta Public Service and the Alberta Crown Corporations are based solely on merit, competency, and equality of all persons, regardless of race, gender, or creed, and that all professional development programs and all other training in diversity, equity, and inclusion within the Alberta Public Service and Alberta Crown Corporations be eliminated. There should be no training so that anyone who's serving the public learns anything about other cultures or how to relate to other cultures, even though those are the people that you're serving, because we are a diverse province. Policy number 23. Under current legislation, the Alberta Human Rights Commission has the mandate of protecting the rights of Albertans on various protected grounds. While noble in concept, the reality is that the Alberta Human Rights Commission is not always protecting the protected grounds rights of Albertans. Bias, prejudice, and diversity, equity, inclusion models have crept into the system, and certain Albertans' protected grounds like religion are in fact not being protected. Both of those policies passed. No problems whatsoever. Let's keep going, because there's more diversity, equity, and inclusions policies that the UCP felt that they as a party had to endorse. In too many cases involving institutions, organizations, businesses, or even with governments, the merits of an individual are either ignored or not taken into account in favor of the model of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The very concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion is racist in nature, and as such must be eliminated in Alberta. But wait, there's more, because the whole concept of vouching, which Dr. Jared Wesley has done an incredible job of advocating for, because there are people who don't have access to ID. And to say that if you don't have plastic ID in your hands, it doesn't matter if your mom or your dad or somebody else is with you and they're vouching for you and you're saying that you are who you are saying you are, you have a right to vote in this province. If you can't do that, then you don't get to vote, is what the UCP has said here. Because no auditing system is in place, providing residency is impossible. Therefore, individuals have the potential of voting in several locations. Or reside out of province with no permanent residence in Alberta. Revoking vouching privileges helps to ensure election integrity. We go all the way down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole with the next one from Banff Kananaskis, which also passed. This is the one that talks about global land seizures. Efforts at ideological colonialism are set up to seize lands and resources by international organizations. They are attempting to do this by transferring Crown lands to First Nations and then revising international law to seize the lands from First Nations. The spirit and intent of the treaties and other agreements initiatives shall remain intact and only be revised through negotiation. It's not a thing. It's absolutely not a thing that happens. But the UCP, as a party, has voted to endorse it wholeheartedly. But let's get to the really horrifying stuff, shall we? Policy number 3. I mean, Danielle Smith's already doing this one. Protect exclusively female spaces and categories such as washrooms, change rooms, shelters, dormitories, sports, awards, etc. for biological females who are female at conception and their young children. Policy number 4. Ensure that minors are protected from exposure to sexually explicit performances and events that receive public funding or are held in public venues. And that's a shot at drag shows. Never mind the question of, what's sexually explicit, because if you go back 100 years, showing your ankles was policy number 14. Ensure that all medications, treatments, and surgeries attributable to health services for sex alteration practices are classified as elective cosmetic procedures costed solely to the requesting patient. Never mind the diagnoses that are causing people to need to access those treatments. Never mind that there's a legitimate evidence-based thing that's being treated. Never mind all of that. They should just be defined as cosmetic surgeries because you just want to look that way. The rationale, they're in the realm of cosmetic surgeries and costs should not be placed on all taxpayers. Passed at the UCP AGM. Policy resolution number 16. Acknowledge that there are only 2 biological sexes and accordingly provide male or female as the exclusive options on all government documents. I'm not done yet, for the record. But this is who the UCP are saying they are. All of the policies that I've talked about so far were passed. This is not a progressive conservative party. The progressive conservative elements of the UCP have unquestionably been purged. Because the fact that all of the policies that I've listed off so far passed indicate what a socially regressive party the UCP now is. But it's not just a betrayal of social progress that the UCP's after. Or the scientific process. They want to go all the way. They went all in this weekend because they also voted forward this policy. This policy makes the argument that we need to recognize the importance of CO2, carbon dioxide, to life and Alberta's prosperity by implementing the following measures: abandoning net zero targets, removing the designation of CO2 as a pollutant, and recognize that CO2 is a foundational nutrient for all life on Earth. The rationale for this policy that the UCP as a party passed overwhelmingly at their AGM. CO2 is a nutrient foundational to life on all life on Earth. The carbon cycle is a biological necessity. CO2 is presently at around 420 parts per million, near the lowest. All of the rest of it is just bullshit. The Earth needs more CO2 to support life and to increase plant yields, both of which will contribute to the health and prosperity of all Albertans. Literally, none of that policy is true. It's not based in actual science. It's all just bullshit. And this is a party that the UCP passed. But they're not just betraying science or morals or ethics. They're betraying the country. From an article in, I hate that I'm using them as a source, the Western Standard, UCP members cheer for Alberta becoming own country at AGM. While the pro-Alberta autonomy policy resolution did pass, the crowd burst out cheering for 10 seconds when a Spruce Grove, Stony Plain UCP member said it did not go far enough. I agree we should distance ourselves from the federal government as much as possible, but the best way we could do that, and I've had this feeling since Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister, is to become an independent Republic of Alberta. And the crowd at the AGM cheered for 10 seconds. So let's be clear. Back when Danielle Smith was trying to win the UCP leadership, and she said to all the Wexiters, you should come join the party. Be a great time. If you don't like it, you don't have to stay. That's what the UCP is now. The UCP is a separatist party that is anti-science. It is anti-evidence-based medicine. And they proved that this weekend by approving all of these policies. This is not up for debate anymore. This is who the UCP are. This is how they have chosen to define themselves. I am not punching down. I am not saying, oh, they're knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. I am saying they're wrong. And anybody who considers themselves to be a Canadian, somebody who believes in science, somebody who believes in expertise, somebody who believes in evidence-based medicine should have no problems saying the UCP is a separatist, anti-science, anti-progress party, period. And the fact that people like Thomas Lukasik, former deputy premier under the PCs, somebody who ran for leadership at the PCs, has no problem saying that thing should mean that anybody who considers themselves to be one of the small C conservatives, one of the progressive conservatives in the province of Alberta, should have no issues, not just distancing themselves from the UCP, but at this point, after this AGM, they should have no issues disavowing publicly and loudly the UCP. I made the mistake, editorialize for a sec before we move on. Sorry, everybody. I made the mistake of listening to a certain podcast that had a certain Barudis on the show. And it's mind-blowing to me, the knots, the pretzels that people will turn themselves into in order to not just say, I don't want to be a part of that team anymore. They've changed. They're not doing things the way that they're supposed to. This is not who I am. I do not want to be counted among those people because they're okay with pretending that abusive parents don't exist. They're okay with pretending that climate change isn't real. They're okay with pretending that evidence-based medicine needs to be a thing. They're okay with all of that. I'm not. The UCP is not a conservative party. They are a separatist, regressive party. And that is the label that they have chosen for themselves coming out of this AGM, period. Moving on from there. This is going to be fun. See, we saved a little bit of, wait, what? But in a good way for the end. Because we knew that I was going to plow through the UCP AGM and have some thoughts. Getting back to the skyboxes, because of course we are. We gotta talk about the Pete Guthrie, because he had some news to share.
Attended any Edmonton Oilers playoff games this past spring and summer, and if so, how many and whose tickets they were?
Okay. Well, like moving to Edmonton, when I was a teen in the early '80s, it certainly made it pretty easy for me to become an Oiler fan. I can say that after a couple of rough decades, I was really pleased to see the team have a lot of success, making it to Game 7 in the Stanley Cup finals last year. And having an opportunity to see some games over that stretch was amazing. And I hope that they can have continued success and bring home the cup this season. I see Connor McDavid got injured. He's out for the next 2 or 3 weeks, so that's unfortunate, but it's a bit of a rough start for them, but I think they can pull it together. Now, that said, all disclosure requirements were fulfilled with the ethics commissioner, and it will be part of my year-end member filing. And I can say that I had no personal or business relations with the host, MHCare, or any of their affiliated companies. And I guess the final thing I might remark is that, Edmonton was the only destination in which I attended games.
Okay. That's not true. So fascinating that we can add Pete Guthrie to the list. But for Pete Guthrie to say, I didn't have any business with anybody that MHCare is affiliated with, no, that's false. And we proved that last week because MHCare's only shareholder and only director, Sam Raish, is in several other companies with several other people who are in other organizations that are absolutely lobbying Infrastructure Alberta. So no, there is business overlapping there. It's just that we're choosing to cut that as finely as we possibly can in order to make it sound like we didn't do anything wrong. But it's pretty clear. You did. So there's that. But we have to issue, referencing last week's episode, we have to do a correction. We have to eat some crow here, folks, because it's been brought to our attention that we got something wrong in that episode. We're going to play the clip that we got wrong. Dren, another Edmonton-based physician, was appointed by Danielle Smith to the Edmonton Police Commission in July of 2023. In fairness, though, the company that both Giant and Raish had together for 3 years was dissolved a few months prior. But it's a fascinating coincidence given the scope of what we've discussed so far. Sorry, we got that wrong. We want to issue an apology because what we said there was that Dr. Nagendran had ended his business relationship with Sam Raish before he got the appointment from Danielle Smith to the Edmonton Police Commission. As it turns out, he did not end that business relationship before then. As it turns out, the business was actually dissolved in March of 2024, quite a while after he was appointed to the police commission. So he was very much still in business with Sam Raish when he got that appointment to the Edmonton Police Commission by Danielle Smith. So sorry, everybody, we got that one wrong. But if you're going to get something wrong, get it wrong in a way where when you have to own up to it, the truth is actually worse. I think that's the way that we're going to try to do that from now on. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about a FOIP in just a sec. But before we do, because we got some new FOIP results back this week, before we do, we want to highlight a little piece that the outgoing ethics commissioner wrote in regards to tickets and invitations to events. Tickets and invitations to events that are an incident of protocol or social obligations that normally accompany the member's office may be accepted if the tickets and invitations to the event are accepted in accordance with the regulations. The Act and regulations no longer contains monetary limits on the value of tickets and invitations to events that may be accepted by members. Oh, we're getting to the good part. We are. Instead, the regulations set out requirements for when and how tickets and invitations to events must be disclosed to the Office of the Ethics Commissioner. Oh, we're getting to the good part. Are you ready? However, a member still breaches the Act by accepting tickets or invitations to events that are not an incident of protocol or social obligation. So, if they were accepting the tickets, as Mr. Guthrie just said there, and it was just for fun, there was no protocol that required him to be there. There was no social obligation. Gosh darn it, he's just been a big fan of the Flames ever since he moved to Edmonton. Then he breached the Act. But let's get into the FOIP, because we got a FOIP back this week. And there were a lot of people who were like, oh, you cannot wait till the weekend to give it. So we put the meat of it out on the social medias, mostly the Twitter machine. But we're going to go through all of the findings here tonight in case you're not on the Twitter machine. But to do that, we have to read a brief little segment from the Globe and Mail. This was back in July. Premier Danielle Smith attended a hockey game on personal time. Sounds like it wasn't one of those, what is the word I'm looking for here? An incident of protocol or social obligation. None of her expenses were paid for by the government of Alberta. Sam Blackett, her spokesperson, said in a statement May 13th, Premier Smith traveled with two staff, both paid their own expenses. The hockey tickets were provided by a private citizen. All rules under the Alberta Conflict of Interest Act were followed. Are you ready to have some fun? I'm ready to have some fun because we got to end this on a high note before we throw to the bonus episode that we're going to be. It's going to get weird in a couple minutes here. None of her expenses were paid for by the government of Alberta. Let's go to the FOIP, shall we? Because it turns out that's not entirely true. Government of Alberta resources were used to book, and then they redacted the something. For Premier Marshall Becca, and I have added in Terry to advise on the number of EPU members that will be going. So, EPU is Executive Protection Unit. That was on May 3rd. Shortly after that, another email that we got in the FOIP. Spoke with Elliot again yesterday on this proposed trip to BC. He said it's very likely will occur, but not 100% confirmed. I want to get the preliminary approval to proceed with incurring costs on the mission. So early on, the staff were already saying, this is going to cost us money. Let's make sure that we have our T's dotted and our I's crossed. Premier's office is going to book all of their own flights, which is, again, fascinating because that's not normally how it works. The staffers apparently were bumping on the fact that their job was to do all of the logistics for this trip, but the flights part, which we have a separate point pending on, that was going to be booked through the Premier's office. Premier will depart on May 10th and return on the 11th as the date shifted from the original direction in the attached email. I have the TA and estimates ready to go. Still waiting on PO, Premier's office, to tell me why they are going. I pushed Elliot again this morning. So even the staffers are saying this seems like maybe not the best idea. As discussed, at the end of the day, we have been directed to do this. One does not include a line like that unless they're trying to make it very, very clear this is out of my hands. The COS, Chief of Staff, did advise the DM of their intent to travel to BC this weekend. Minister Horner will need to sign off on the transfer of power thinger. So as soon as the Premier's office provides the purpose of this trip, we can finalize the TA and send it up for the MNH's signature. We have flagged risks and concerns, including non-refundable hotel rooms, so we have done our due diligence as best as we can. One of the next emails that we got in the chain, you just can't even make this stuff up. They had to rebook. Good morning, Jeanette. We need to update the hotel booking as per below. This is on May 6th. You will now be heading to Vancouver Friday the 10th and leaving on Saturday the 11th. Could you please update the rooms for a Friday check-in and a Saturday checkout? Would be the same group as before: Premier, Marshall, Becca, and EPU. So again, all of the logistics that are being used to book this trip are being done on the government dime. Okay, I canceled all of the 6 rooms and then they blanked out the hotel. I will assign the 3 rooms that you booked over the weekend to the 3 EPU, but changed the dates. Again, EPU, Executive Protection Unit. We redacted out the names of the sheriffs who were part of the Executive Protection Unit because, quite frankly, it felt a little gross that we were getting their names. We just needed to know that there were the 3 people who were sheriffs. And then Premier, Marshall Smith, Becca Pollock, all from the 10th to 11th. Assumed you have already provided the hotel with your credit card. I will inform the hotel. The EPU bodyguard will be paying with their own credit card, their own corporate credit card, upon checkout. Your credit card will be authorized to pay for the other 3 rooms. These are the P cards, the purchasing cards. So well in advance of the trip, as far back as May 6th, the plan was to have the government, on the taxpayer dime, pay for the trip. And this is where it gets, in case there's any doubt that the trip was being booked using government resources, that doubt is laid to rest here, because they actually go back to the hotel and they say, hey, since we're government of Alberta, we're also GST, HST exempt. Our GST registration number is Rena. I've also attached our GST exemption letter here. Would you be able to deduct the GST, HST amount from the total? And then there's a boatload of paperwork that we didn't include because it's just dry, boring paperwork. But there's a boatload of paperwork that the government actually went through the process of filling out to ensure that the hotel that the Premier and Becca and Marsh stayed at, as well as the three sheriffs, who I assume got paid for being there, to make sure that the hotel rooms were not charged GST and HST for personal rooms on personal time. They literally used the power and weight of the government to get away with like 10, 20 bucks in not paying taxes. And then we got the request for the payment. Again, this is important to unbullshitting the whole thing, because it wasn't until May 15th that it was made clear, oh, wait, no, Marsh and Becca, they're supposed to pay the money back. The discounted rates that they got because it was all booked with Government of Alberta resources and P cards. Hi, Crystal. Can you please send request to pay as soon as possible to Marshall Smith for $471.88, Becca Pollock for $471.88. The attached invoices for hotels were paid for by Intergovernmental Relations Mission and Planning P card, but are to be personally paid by both. I appreciate your assistance. Thank you. And what's fascinating, I love this. I love this so much. This just makes my heart full. We did our whole FOIP thing a couple weeks ago about how we got that P card thing in the first place. And how it demonstrated that the Premier's office had in fact lied to the Globe and Mail, because again, they issued that statement to the Globe and Mail saying, no, there was no taxpayer costs on the 13th. Well, there was no communication about getting money from Becca and Marshall until the 15th. We did, in that initial FOIP, get confirmation that Becca had paid the money, but we didn't get any confirmation that Marshall had paid. Oddly, though, with the FOIP that we got back super fast, we did this time get confirmation that Marshall Smith did, in fact, a day later on May 16th, pay back the taxpayer for $471.88. But again, this is just another lie in the stack of lies, because you can't say that there was no cost to the taxpayer. And I want to be clear, given the nightmare shit show that Rachel Notley had to navigate, given the nightmare shit show that some of her ministers had to navigate, the harassment that a lot of NDP ministers and Rachel Notley as Premier had to endure, I don't actually have a problem with Danielle Smith having protection. I don't have an issue with that. What I do have an issue with, though, is the government saying there were no costs to taxpayers because of this trip, when taxpayers paid for 3 security officers to travel with the Premier. And again, it's bad that she had protection. Not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is it would have been fine to say Danielle Smith went and, yeah, we paid for it. Whatever. No big deal. It's nothing. But why lie about it? And there's still lots of unanswered questions, particularly in regards to why the Premier's office was booking all of their own flights, which even had, as you saw in the emails that we just finished throwing up on the screen, even had the staffers going, that's unusual. Paraphrasing, obviously, but that seems to be the reaction that was in those documents. So we have a FOIP pending on not only the Premier's calendar, but also on those flights. We want to know what the tickets were. Did they pay? Did they reimburse for the flights too? Or was there perhaps no cost for the flights? How did that work out? Does somebody own a private plane? Did somebody charter a private plane? Was it a big group flight? Because there were, as we've already established last week, a boatload of people from Alberta in that Skybox that belonged to the business partner of Sam Raish. So many questions that need to be answered there. There we go. There are two last clips that we want to play before we wrap up tonight's show. And next week, I promise we're going to be getting the speaker's corner, the open mic going again. It's just that with the break that we took for being able to put together the Skybox episode, we had a lot to catch up on, and this week's been an absolute shit show. So next week, we promise. But we have two clips that we think are perhaps pertinent when it comes to all of the things that we've talked about today. We'll start with the pampered one, I think, because Danielle Smith used to have some strong opinions about how people in positions of leadership with access to the public purse should behave.
When Albertans see this kind of personal pampering and self-service in their leaders, they lose faith not only in that individual, but in the political and democratic process itself. The lasting effect of this kind of entitlement is a cynical public that believes the worst instead of hoping for the best. We should see the very best of our values and the very brightest of our intentions reflected in our leaders. It's a shame this Premier has let us down. Mr. Speaker, Albertans deserve better.
The Honourable Member Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
We got one other clip that's particularly pertinent to tonight's various subject matters that we want to share as well. And we're going to, as is the fashion, give Danny the last word here.
I don't believe that Justin Trudeau has a mandate to impose the kind of policies that he is talking about, particularly with the emissions cap. It's why we started the Scrap the Cap campaign, particularly with the net zero power regulations. We are worried that the approach that they're taking is one where they clearly have an agenda to keep it in the ground. By having such aggressive emissions reduction targets by 2030 would shut in, so S&P Global says, 1 million barrels of production. By 2035, 2.1 million barrels of production. We don't think that they have the authority to do that. They have consistently gone down in the polls over the last year. They no longer have a coalition government with the NDP. And this is one of the most significant aspects of our GDP, potential to lose 150,000 jobs, potential to cost not only our government, but their government significant revenues. So when you have something of this importance, he should seek a mandate to be able to do this. And that's why we would be quite happy to see an election called sooner rather than later. If he gets a mandate, then I guess we deal with it through the courts afterwards. If he doesn't get a mandate, then hopefully we'll be able to have a constructive conversation with the next government.
So you see, if you're going to implement policies, you should have campaigned on them. Now, there's a lot of people who would gladly make the argument that we just had a federal election not that long ago. And in the course of that federal election, a lot of these policies, if not the ideas, if not the letter of the actual policies, were talked about then. So to try to say that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, that nobody could see these policies coming, in many ways they did campaign on them. But it's pretty wild to hear Danielle Smith, who has spent the last week, several months, introducing policies that she absolutely didn't campaign on, introducing regressive policies out of the blue. There's no shortage of examples. The Alberta Pension Plan. She explicitly said she wasn't going to campaign on that. The provincial police force. She explicitly said she wasn't going to campaign on that. She certainly didn't campaign on these anti-trans policies. She certainly didn't campaign on any of the explosion and how the healthcare system has been disintegrated at a time where many Albertans are struggling to access healthcare. All of this is happening while she isn't keeping her promises. She isn't keeping her promises about the tax cut. We are seeing an education and healthcare system crumbling. The UCP government has done next to nothing to address the cost of living. Where'd Danny get her mandate? Because according to her, it's from just under 5,000 people in Edmonton. And if she introduces any of the policies that the UCP across the board brought in with a mandate from only 5,000 people, that circle doesn't exactly square itself. We've got the last clip, and then we'll do the plugs. But before we do the plugs, I got to give you the heads up on what's going to happen next. I'm going to do the heads up before what happens next, and then we'll do the clip. I'm going to change things up. So what happens next? We have got, kids, the interview. I was really hoping that we were going to be able to just like press play and the interview would go, but apparently the hosting service that we have has size restrictions, and the interview is just too big for the internet in the way that we wanted to do it. So immediately after we shut down this show, a couple minutes later, you're going to see a brand new live stream come up with an interview that we got to do earlier this week, and this is bonkers. We do lots of interviews on the show. We try to do like 50-50 live shows. Nate rants and reads the news for an hour or two, and interviews with politicians, interviews with experts, interviews with smart people. And I want to be real clear before I tell you what you're about to get if you decide to stay up past 10 o'clock. We are very clear that we will have just about anybody on the show. We've invited Danielle Smith and multiple UCP MLAs and ministers to come on the show. We would have limitations for how those conversations worked, but we've said, hey, you know what? If you're going to go on the fringe minority or whatever it was podcast, if you're going to go on all the far alt-right podcasts, why don't you come on over here? We'll have a little chat. We'll talk about one thing only, and we're gonna do some fact checking while we do it. What do you say? There's certain people who just refuse to come on the show, but we got contacted by a certain political organization about a week and a half ago, asking if maybe we'd have a conversation. Didn't expect it because it's not provincial directly, but it does impact the provincial realm. It turns out that if you take a look at the federal politics, which we very rarely do, the House of Commons, Parliament, is kind of it's been messed up for a couple weeks now. It's been filibustered for a little while now. And some of the parties that are not directly involved with the filibuster have some issues they want to try to bring forward. One of them is speaking to access to healthcare, particularly women's healthcare, and particularly access to gender supporting care. And so if you stick around in a couple minutes, if you're watching this live, if you're listening to the podcast version or watching the recorded version, then whatever, just click on the other thing. But we had a little conversation with none other than the leader of the federal NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and the MP for Winnipeg, Leah Gazin. And we talked about healthcare in Alberta. We talked about the limitations that the provincial government is introducing in regards to women being able to access reproductive care, women being able to access abortions, and we talked about the attack on trans folks. So I'm going to do all the plugs and play the last clip, but if you are wanting to stay up for another half hour or so, give us a couple minutes to get that sucker loaded up, and we're going to be broadcasting that in just a sec. This is kind of cool. I'm not going to lie. It was a little bit like, oh, this is outside of the normal sandbox, but let's give it a go. It was a short conversation. It's only 20 minutes, so it won't keep you up too late, but it's worth it. All of that being said, I'm going to do the plugs, and then I'll do the clip, and then we'll wrap it up. So the plugs are, as always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're producing here at The Breakdown, then we would absolutely love it if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Huge thanks to, we blew through our FOIP budget last month. And after the Skybox episode, wow, a boatload of people decided to sign up to be Patreon sponsors. We only do those deep dives like once every 5 months or so. So just managing some expectations there. But a big thanks to all of our long-standing Patreon supporters. A happy welcome to all of our new Patreon supporters. And if you want to be one of those Patreon supporters, you can sign up at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. If you're not into long-term commitments, then you can always also e-transfer us to help us support continuing to produce the kind of content that we do at you can send an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca. All of that'll be in the show notes of all of the things. And we do also have our merch. You can get the toques. I finally got my toque. I was going to wear it tonight and then I forgot. I'll wear it next week. We got the toques, we got the t-shirts, we got the hoodies, we got all of the good stuff, and you can get that thanks to our friends at abpoly.ca. I want to say a huge thank you to the chat. I want to say huge thank you to everybody who's been watching the show live, listening to the audio version of the podcast. We'd love it if you gave us a review, a like. Smash that subscribe button, kids. And before I do the final play out, we got to do the clip, as is the tradition, because we need that little lift, especially after this week.
I tend to be pretty trusting.
If I ever stop laughing at that clip, I'm going to get worried because it's just so good. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be back. I'm really looking forward to getting back into the groove of the live shows. We have some other interviews lined up as well this week that we're very excited. We're going to be talking with some legal scholars in regards to the implications of all of the new legislation that we've seen from Danielle Smith in the UCP, the anti-trans stuff, the Bill of Rights, maybe. Who knows what amendments we're going to see tomorrow. We're going to be talking with some folks who are going to be able to speak to the legal implications as well as the lived experience implications of the anti-trans legislation. It's going to be a busy week. We got like 4 interviews. So get ready to have the fire hose turned on a little bit over the next 2 or 3 weeks because we've got tons of conversations that we're very excited to be presenting to you. I want to end with this. It can feel horrifying looking at the province that we're living in. And it can feel deeply, deeply discouraging that roughly 5,000 people voted in favor of policies that are profoundly regressive, that are not based in evidence, that are not based in science. If they're anything, they're anti-science, they're anti-evidence. I would argue that in most cases, they're anti-compassion, they're anti-kindness. That can feel like a huge downer. But here's what I'm choosing to focus on this week as the shit show continues. Yesterday, I had the privilege of attending a rally, a protest. It was the most upbeat protest. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was fabulous here in Calgary, where at least 2,500, 3,000 people showed up to rally against and the policies that Danielle Smith and the UCP are introducing and show support for the 2S LGBTQ plus community. And it was amazing. It was there was definitely frustration, there was definitely anger, there was definitely hurt, but there was a whole lot of hope, and there were a whole lot of people that showed up and said, "Not on my watch, you don't." And that was just one of several parallel protests that took place. There were also protests in Lethbridge, and there were protests that were very well attended in Edmonton. I would feel comfortable saying that more people showed up yesterday to condemn these policies than who voted for them. And that's a really important thing to focus on, because I believe in my heart of hearts that there are more Albertans out there that do not subscribe to this batshit anti-science, fearful, regressive agenda than there are that do. And I think one of the things that we have to figure out how to do, and we'll take your suggestions here at the show as well, is figure out how to reach more of those people who don't know what's going on, who would be horrified at all of the things that are being said and done in the name of preserving children's rights. Because let's be very, very clear. They're not preserving anything. They're attacking them. And I think that more Albertans will stand up to protect the vulnerable than will show up to punch down on them. That's what I'm betting on. That's what I'm focusing on this week. And we just got to make sure that we're having those conversations with people, that we're keeping people aware of what's going on, even when it's uncomfortable, because I believe that more people will show up to support our better natures than will try to tear down vulnerable kids. So with that being said, we'll kind of see you in 5 minutes when we put up the Jagmeet Singh interview. But in the meantime and in between time, before next week, take care of yourselves. Keep the conversation going.